filings. And if you've ever worked in a law firm or corporate legal team, you know how long reviewing all those documents takes. AI is starting to change that, not by replacing lawyers, but by transforming how legal work gets done. So what's really changing? The workflows, the business model, the way lawyers are trained, all of the above. We're about to unpack all of that. Please help me welcome Vivek Sharma, Partner and Chief AI Officer of PwC UK, and Winston Weinberg, Co-founder and CEO of Harvey. There are so many instances, where accuracy really counts. When you say something is or isn't in a contract, it really better be there. When you write a legal brief, you better cite real cases. Just ask Donald Trump's ex-lawyer, Michael Cohen, about that. So I'm curious, how when you guys are building these legal AI tools, how do you make sure, particularly generative AI-based systems, are actually fit for purpose when it comes to legal work?
Yeah.
Why don't we go to you first, Winston, and then Vivek.
Yeah, you can kind of think of this as if you're asking like a general model and it doesn't, even if it has been trained on these materials, what you're kind of doing is walking up to a lawyer or something like that and saying, what is the law, right? And they're going to remember bits and pieces of it. But if you ask them like, what does it say on page 7 of case Apple v. Pepper? I have not met a lawyer that can tell you what that is verbatim. But if you gave them that case, they could go and find it very quickly. And so the best thing you want to do is just ground this information, right? So whether you put that into the training data or you do retrieval, no matter what, you need to collect that data and you need to make sure that you're doing a combination of basically telling the models to go search and sift through this information, pull that information, then use that to answer the question, right? And I think that's number one. Number two is like a lot of these places like PwC, you have a lot of layers of review, right? And junior associates at PwC are not 100% accurate every single time they do work, right?
Really? Vivek? Is that true?
Vivek, is that true?
Couldn't possibly confirm that.
Every time, right? And so you're going to have checking processes, right? And so as long as you put into the platform or the application that you're building the correct way to check these things, it's going to actually be very similar to working with a junior colleague who probably has a lot of it correct, but you still need to do a double check.
Right. And Winston, let's talk about what Harvey can do and what it sort of can't do right now. What are the sort of legal bits of legal work you can have done with Harvey, and what can't it do at the moment?
Yeah, so I'd say a lot of the kind of like first level review things and diligence, discovery, tasks like that. I'd say that basically the way that we're going about this is we're trying to build out the very large use cases that you can do with very high accuracy. So a diligence, a discovery, things like that, or reviewing a document for certain terms, extraction, et cetera. And then what we're doing is we're taking very specific complex work that is more like partner level work, and we're building systems that just do that from start to finish. But it's very hard to just build a general model that can do every single thing on Earth, right? That's very difficult. But if you basically say, I want to build a system that can do merger control across 70 different jurisdictions, there are steps to do that, right? And so there you can train a model and build a system that does that incredibly accurately. And so basically what we're doing is the highest surface area for lower level tasks, and then for very high level cognitive tasks, build very specific workflows or solutions.
And Vivek, at PwC, how are you using tools like Harvey? How have you found that process?
Yeah, so we moved with Harvey pretty quickly. I think we're one of the first large global clients. I think we've now got 15,000 lawyers and tax attorneys across the globe using Harvey. It's almost become part of, we kind of started off thinking it's kind of an augmentation layer. And I think now it's kind of truly almost like an assistant at the side of your desk. And I think where we were at the start when we started training the models, we kind of dived pretty deeply into tax, for instance. So we've got tax foundation models that we're building across 33 territories, and then grounded it in legislation in every country, in case law. So if you then look at how we're using it, I mean, there's like, if you look at our business, extremely complex. In tax alone, we have 20 different service propositions, anything from R&D and IP right through to international tax. And every one of those teams are now using the model in different ways, but it's almost part of their day-to-day kind of role. So we track usage. And we've kind of seen from where we were a year and a half or so ago to where we are right now. It's now just part of the DNA of our staff. So when you're looking at any kind of research we need to do, looking at problems, how can we get to that sort of end point and accelerate that journey and ground it within information? I think the really important thing for us is we get asked this question again and again. There are other open models out there. You can ask questions. They all look quite professional. You can see from a professional firm like PwC, accuracy is everything. Our threshold around materiality is not the same. So having everything grounded, having an audit trail so we understand where that information came from, what case law is backing it, what legislation is backing it by sort of territory, that's kind of, that's a move that is a kind of a must. It's a kind of a minimum requirement for us as well. So I would say everywhere through from, and we're tracking this at all grades. So from our juniors, our associates, all the way through to partners, it's now become a kind of a standard use through everything we're doing day to day.
Right. And have you found that, that you're sort of taking maybe those junior associates, and now they're sort of fact-checking the research that's coming from Harvey or another model. Does that change how they sort of think about their job?
So it's really interesting, actually. We spent a lot of time when we first started rolling AI. So we were super, super quick within PwC to adopt the models, general productivity tools like ChatGPT Enterprise and Copilot, and obviously Harvey as well around some of our domains like tax, legal, and deals. We did a lot of kind of sentiment kind of analysis around it. How are you feeling? What's your level of nervousness versus excitement? It was interesting. We were expecting the more senior staff to be the ones saying, right, actually, we're really looking forward to this, and this is going to kind of augment and help us speed things up, and we can do this. We can kind of increase productivity. But actually, the junior staff across the board were really excited about it. And clearly, there's some level of nervousness about what will this tool do? What does it mean for our roles? But on the whole, most people want this technology. And if you're looking at juniors, they don't want to sit there going through legislation manually and trying to piece things together. The fact that they can have a tool to kind of get them 60, 70% of the way there, then they can do more of the qualitative work. That's almost a kind of one of the problems we had, is actually quite an interesting anecdote, is the complaints we got at the start from the staff, especially junior staff, from not having access to the tool. We did it as a phased rollout.
Interesting.
And we almost had this kind of revolt coming from a lot of our staff saying, well, when are we going to get access? I can hear others talking about how amazing this is and how it's helping them with their role.
Right.
So it was like overwhelmingly positive. I think now to a point, I think if we took Harvey away from our staff, there'd be a riot.
Right. Please think of questions, because I'm going to come to the audience for questions in a moment. But sort of following on from that, I'm curious how you both see maybe training as a whole in the legal profession changing, because certainly at big firms, there was always this idea you'd bring in these big cohorts of recent graduates, and you'd set them to work going through contract review or doing legal research, sometimes diligence on really complex deals, and that's how they would learn the job. And do we see, is that going to change? Do you think that's going to change at all now, Winston, with tools like Harvey, and maybe we see a return to a traditional apprenticeship model where you're actually kind of shadowing a senior partner?
So that's what I was going to say. Is I think like early on in professional services, you would literally just sit at a partner's desk, like as a new associate, and they would take you to all the client meetings. Like you would learn everything through that. And I think what happened is things became so complex and the work was so demanding from clients, right? I mean, think about how many international mergers there were like 50 years ago, basically none. And all of them are incredibly complex now. And that apprenticeship model, I think, like kind of broke down. And so I think actually what's going to happen is if you have tools that can actually do this work to a very high level of accuracy, why could you not turn them into training tools, right? Like that'd be a very good training tool. And so I think what will end up happening is firms like PwC will implement AI training programs, and then they'll have more time for the actual human training as well on the partnership side. And the human training that I think is the most important is not, oh, I need to look at this document and find this clause and review it. Okay, cool, right? Like the human training that's really important is, I'm going to take you to this board meeting, right? And there's this incredibly important decision being made. You're going to see how the C-suite thinks about that decision, how they think about how they're going to structure this deal for tax considerations, things like that. And I think that right now, you don't get that until like 10 years into your career. If you can give that to junior associates earlier on, they're going to actually really enjoy their jobs more, and it'll look more like what it looks like on TV, which is why a lot of people join anyway.
Right. Yeah, I'll get get the TV version of the law.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a very interesting show watching people do document review in a,
Yeah, exactly right. No one would watch that.
Yeah. I'm curious, as clients know that you're using this technology, does it change their sort of their expectations and maybe even also the business model? I mean, do you think the billable hour is dead here? Is that one of the takeaways?
Look, if I'm being really candid, we early stages when we saw just the ability, even the kind of the early stage sort of LLMs, is that you could see actually the business models do need to morph pretty quickly. And I think the way we approach this is you've got to have this kind of lack of fear. There's a kind of an approach, number one, is stick your head in the sand and hopefully it will just go away and we just carry on doing what we're doing right now. Versus the let's
always
just
a good
work
approach.
Hey, listen, and that approach has worked for decades, right?
Yeah, right.
But I think with this wave right now, and where AI is going, and how quickly the models are becoming more and more sophisticated, and we've just seen where Harvey's moved over the last year and a half. It's just incredible. We've kind of sat back and spent a lot of time almost kind of red teaming ourselves, right? Accepting the areas that are going to be cannibalized and saying, right, we know this is where we're going to use AI. How are people going to buy? But not thinking that the thing that's really changed is not thinking, right, this is what we do today. We're just going to do exactly the same in the future, but we're now using AI. That to me is kind of law of diminishing returns. It's not value accretive. What we spent our time doing is looking across all of our practices where we're using AI is to say, right, what can we now do that we couldn't do before? What are the markets we could go after? What's the value we can now sort of bring to clients? All of our proprietary data, how can we bring that in when we're offering clients? So there's partly the kind of the incremental value. So when we're kind of doing our handshake with a client, we think you should pay X for this outcome rather than we spent 2,000 hours on.
So it's an outcome-based model as opposed to a time-based model. Interesting. Let's get questions from the audience. There's one right there, a couple over there. I saw that Samsa's hand go up first. Gentleman in the tie there.
Samsa Samila, yes, at Business School. So I had a question related to the apprenticeship model and the training. So how does it change the organization of a law firm in terms of the talent funnel? Because we're used to having sort of huge numbers of juniors relative to seniors. Does this change the ratio? Does it change the organization?
What do you think is happening, Winston?
I think there is a world in which that does change. I don't think that necessarily means that there are less lawyers, though, right? You could think of just basically like, what does the structure of each team look like, right? And it's possible that, I think Wachtell is a decent example of this, where I think Wachtell's leverage model is, it's like 1 partner to 1.2 or something like that, associates. It's quite small, right? And I think that what will end up happening is law firms and folks like PwC will be able to take on more projects, and those teams will be leaner. I don't necessarily think that means there are less lawyers. It's just by project, there'll be less. One other thing to think about too is like professional services are not in a vacuum, right? And I think we talk about that a lot, especially in the legal industry and other industries where we just assume that nothing else in the economy is going to change, right? And everyone is going to be using AI, right? All the clients are going to be using AI.
I want to ask a question about that. If you have your client, a corporate legal team, one of the reasons they might have turned to a professional service firm or an external law firm is they just couldn't handle the workload, or there were certain areas of expertise they didn't have the experts in. Now they have the access to these models also. They could be using Harvey. Is there going to be less demand for external professional services? I'm curious what you both think. Vivek, maybe you go first, and then Winston.
Yes, so I think it's a given that sort of all sides of the fence are going to have AI models. So it's kind of what is the value you're kind of offering? So partly, I think when we're going to market, the way I think we're going to start positioning ourselves, and we're already beginning to do it, is to say it's not just, and we're having these conversations right now. Actually, it's about who has the most sophisticated model. And so when you've kind of got
better than your model.
I think there's going to be an element of that. I think it's smart bench with sophisticated AI models. There's going to be partly the kind of conversations you have. So being able to sort of say that actually we can kind of get to a better answer and more value if we're using this model. When on the other side there is a model that has been used by the regulators or the opposing party, there is going to be this kind of, in the same way that you go for one legal firm where you think actually is the bench there of a higher caliber than the other. So there is an element of that. So there's a table stakes bit where you've got to have this hybrid model of the smartest people with the smartest models.
And Winston, are you seeing that too?
I think there's another point here too, which is just, okay, if we look at an average data room right now or something in terms of like how much MSA is in there, say there's on average 100,000. I have no idea, but say that's what it is, right? If everyone is using AI to do business and to negotiate MSAs, in 10 years, How many MSAs are in the average data room? 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, et cetera, right? How many more regulations are there about AI that you need to navigate when you're doing a deal, right? And so my point here is, a lot of professional services, yes, some of it is countercyclical, like bankruptcy and restructuring, but a lot of it is cyclical. And as the economy adopts AI and as every single industry moves faster, the expectation on professional services to support those industries moving faster and in a more complex environment is going to be significantly higher. And so I think it's going to flip from like, oh no, are there going to be less lawyers, to if we don't use AI, legal cannot keep up
Right.
with the rest of the
Interesting.
business world.
Got it. Other questions? I think there's still a hand here. If we can get a mic. There we go.
Helmut Ludwig, Southern Methodist University in Dallas. Winston, you described at the beginning how to use AI as a more intelligent search.
Yeah.
And where do you see it turning over to agentic approaches? And you turn over complete processes to an agent. And what are the limitations there?
Yeah, I think you still want to have a bunch of checking processes, even in an agentic process, right? So the way that I think about this and the way that we kind of like build workflows is, a workflow to me is you have different agents doing different steps, right? You don't want an agentic process that does the whole thing from start to finish in a lot of professional services, because it's very hard to find out where the error was, right? So if I take a due diligence list and I apply it to a data room, and then that gives me the massive 100-page diligence memo that says everything that's in there, if something's wrong, how do I find out where it went wrong, right? Like the reason why coding and math is so much easier here is because there are ways to recursively check the output, right? You can just actually check if it was right at each step. And you need to put those same frameworks in if you're doing anything agentic anyway. So my point here is, I think it's better to have an agent that does a part of a research, an agent that compares that research to a document, and then an agent that goes in and checks every single one of those steps, and that goes into a workflow. If it's just, hey, go and do this merger, please, I don't think that is going to be very effective. Yeah.
Interesting. Other questions? I've got another question. I don't see any in the audience. I'm curious, in the last year, one of the big things in AI has been all of these reasoning models. OpenAI came out with O1 and then O3. Has this impacted the way Harvey is kind of functioning? Are you starting to use these models under the hood?
Yeah, the way that we used to design our systems was kind of basically creating a reasoning model. And it's not the same, we weren't actually creating reasoning models, but it was the same thing, which is break down a process step by step and then fine tune a model to do each one of those steps, right? And so the reasoning models have just made it so it's much easier for us to do that at scale. The thing that's really interesting and we should always think about is the reasoning models, think about the data that they're trained on. A lot of what you need to train reasoning models on, the reasoning traces, you can see what it's doing each step. How does it know how to do that, right? How does it know how to do a disclosure schedule? How does it know how to do a disclosure schedule the way that this Apollo or KKR, et cetera, wants that, right? And so my point here is, a lot of the value that you can provide as a software provider or as a professional service provider is, how do you teach the model what are the correct reasoning steps to do in this process? And so I think this is very good and like a massive accelerant to everything, but it's not like you train these models on all of the internet and it can just do every single professional service task. Sorry, but a lot of professional service tasks, it's not reason why you do one step or another. It's to be compliant with a code or something like that.
Sure. Are there elements of the law that you think these systems won't touch, or at least not in the next year or two?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are elements of the law it will never touch, which is there's tons of subjective elements of law, right? Incredible amount, right? There's, if you talk to a very good M&A attorney, they will say, a public M&A attorney, they will say, I've done 200 deals, and 80 of them are pretty much the same thing, and 20 of them were very complex. And they were complex because of some human relationship, and that's it. That's the reason they were complex. It wasn't because of the structure, it wasn't because it was a reverse triangular merger or something like that. It was because this person wanted to make sure that they were in charge of this subsidiary that had this relationship with XYZ. And a lot of professional services is that. I don't think the models are going to figure that out unless they can follow us around and listen to everything that we're saying and everything that we're doing.
And Vivek, how are you thinking about it within PwC? Where are there limits to where you will try to implement AI systems?
I think look, we're trying to. So reasoning for us is really interesting. Is do we get to a point where we're kind of looking at some of these reasoning models grounded on the right data, almost acting like well tenured sort of professional staff in a particular area, but there's always a review layer on top. I think there are certain things to Winston's point when we're looking at the human nuances around. Look, this is a business. The models kind of want to go for a kind of an outcome, which is what's the most kind of efficient way to get from A to B. So no matter how you train the models, there's a certain amount of assumptions that are built into it. And what people are really buying us for is to say, look, you understand our business, you understand our culture, you understand our reputational barriers.
All of that human.
So how would we structure this deal or this kind of tax planning? So there are certain things, but what is really exciting is how quickly we can get to those points. I mean, the point earlier to me, and what's really exciting for us is that the only thing that stops a lot of the VC houses, the PE houses, a lot of the deal making is just the cost and the time and the effort it takes to actually get through that process. Now, if you look at any of the clients we work with, they would love to scan 3x or 10x the deals they're doing right now. And the technology, the kind of quicker it enables us to get to kind of that, the kind of red flag reporting to say, actually, there's some real mileage here.
Right.
That's going to land. And similarly with structuring, I mean, look, if clients had all the time in the world and the ability to start saying, right, we constantly want to kind of look at how we restructure our business and how do we kind of optimize it, they would do it. But right now, again, the limits are how many experts do we need to bring in?
I'm going to have to end it there because we're out of time. So thank you very much to Vivek, thank you to Winston, and thank you all for listening.
Thanks.